Hey, good morning, students. Welcome to Monday and the final section of Chapter 22, South Asia. Today we are actually going to talk about climate regions throughout South Asia. And if you have your textbook available, you're going to be want to look at pages 617 through 620. And I will expect that you will have either already read that or will be reading it here over the next couple of days as you work on uh, the homework assignment for climate zones in South Asia, which we will talk about back in Google Classroom probably tomorrow. So looking at, let's start out here on page 618 actually. We're going to be talking about monsoons. Now, you guys saw the term monsoon on your vocabulary sheet, and most of you pulled the definition right out of the textbook. Much of South Asia experiences three distinct or unique seasons: hot, wet, and cool. These three seasons depend on seasonal winds called monsoons. Figure 1 shows the yearly pattern of the monsoons. During the cool season from October to late February, dry monsoon winds blow from the north and northeast. And that's, if you look at your maps in your textbook's atlas, the north and northeast is the winds coming down off of China and the Himalayan plateau there. The hot season follows from late February to June. During this period, warm temperatures heat the air, which rises and causes a change in wind direction. Moist ocean air then moves in from the south and southeast. So again, if you look on your atlas map, you know that to the south and southeast of this region, you have, on a large scale, you have the Indian Ocean. On a smaller scale, to the south and southeast, you have the Bay of Bengal. And recall from our discussions on the water cycle that when you have warm winds passing over a large body of water like that, the wind is going to allow the surface water to evaporate, to actually become water vapor, and be lifted up into the wind. The wind is then going to carry it um, until it hits land. When it gets to land, as the air starts to rise, going up onto the land, in particular if you have mountains or plateaus, such as what we have here in the Indian subcontinent. As that air rises, the water vapor is going to start to condense. And when enough moisture condenses, you're going to get precipitation, where water droplets actually fall out of the sky, hitting the ground, and then either running off the ground or soaking into the ground and running through the aquifers to the collection points. So the four cycles of the water cycle there. When those monsoon winds switch from coming down from China in the northeast, not a lot of bodies of water up there, very, very dry back country. And so the winds are very, very dry. And even when those winds are lifting up as they come across the Himalayan mountains, there's not enough moisture in there to condense and cause significant amounts of precipitation. But as those winds shift down to the southeast uh, from um, from the northeast, and they start coming in over that Bay of Bengal, over the Indian Ocean, and picking up all that moisture, um, the the moist ocean air moving in is actually going to cause a significant amount of precipitation when you get that lifting as the air comes across the uh, uh, the Broken Mountain ranges around the southern part of India and up onto the northern highlands going in towards the Himalayas. You will see a significant amount of precipitation at that point in time. And when most people talk about monsoon, while the book defines monsoon as a seasonal wind, most people refer to monsoon season as being when the winds shift down to the southeast and are blowing in with all of that moisture. So the average person will think of a monsoon as being synonymous with these violent storms, dropping a great deal of moisture. So you can see in the book the wet season lasts from June or early July through September, called the monsoon season generally. And the monsoon rains are heaviest in the eastern part of South Asia when the rains sweep over the Ganges and the Brahmaputra Delta. That makes sense. If the winds are coming up from the southeast, they're going to impact Sri Lanka and India on that eastern coast. And so that's where most of the moisture is going to fall. And if you do look at your South Asia rainfall charts there, here in the book, you can see that in the winter and summer seasons, your rainfall November to March, which is over here in the yellow zone, not a lot of rainfall. Most of the area is in yellow, showing a very diminished rainfall. Whereas your summer season over here with the summer monsoons, the eastern part of the peninsula, eastern part of the peninsula is where the bulk of the rainfall is occurring, here in the northern highlands and right along the coast, and then up the west coast only where the mountains are actually forming the west coast due to that mountainous lifting. So take a look at that, those photographs or those images in your textbook, and take a look. Right now I'm going to show you something which I found out on Wikipedia, and it's kind of a cool thing. If you look down here in the left-hand, bottom left-hand side, you can see the dates rapidly changing. So October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. So keep track of that date and watch. This is our South Asia area right here. Watch how, as the dates cycle through that June to September time frame, the area around here shows extremely heavy precipitation, and then how after September, as it gets into that November, December, January time frame, you only see a little bit of rain forming out in the coastal areas. A little bit up here in the coming in off the Persian Gulf, as we learned about when we were studying the Middle East. But you can see the cycle of rain, the cycle of precipitation throughout the calendar year in that June, July, August time frame, right there. June, July, August, October, November, December, January, March, April, May, June. Oh my God, monsoon, monsoon, monsoon. So I thought you'd get a big kick out of that. That actually comes out of Wikipedia. You can see the little image down here in the Wikipedia article on monsoons. Now, of course, talking about, you can see on the next page, page 619, they talk about natural disasters. That's the thing with, I'm going to go ahead and throw the monsoon slide up there again. When you look at that monsoon season, you see that massive amount of rainfall that's occurring in June, July, and August. And look at where your rivers are. Okay, here's your Ganges River running along the Himalayas. You got the river that's coming around through Nepal there, joining up with the Ganges as it's making its way down here to the Bay of Bengal. You got the other river over here, major river. And imagine all of that rainfall as it's hitting these Himalayas up here, and it's hitting this northern highlands, this nice flat area. The amount of runoff between June and August, when you have that much precipitation, is just absolutely phenomenal. And so what ends up happening is you get all that rainfall concentrated in about a 2.5, 3 month time frame. And all of the runoff going into those rivers is going to cause those rivers to swell. So some of that water is going to soak into the ground, provides groundwater, which is good for crop growing and everything. And so you're going to have a significant growing season in that July to June to September timeframe. The downside, of course, is that when you get into the low-lying areas, which are out here along the coastal areas north of the western Bach Mountains, or sorry, eastern Bakat Mountains, when you get into these lowlands down around the delta areas, and this lowland over here in the delta areas, that that massive amount of water causes some significant flooding. So India in particular, but also these couple of the smaller countries here, Bhutan and Bangladesh here on the floodplains, they can actually suffer from absolutely devastating floods that will drown out the flatland. And when you get that much water, where the ground becomes so soggy that it's got standing water on it, when you're walking on it, your footprint, you actually sink down into the dirt and your footprint fills up with water. When you've got that much water in the ground, it's not really good for growing much because any seeds that you wind up planting are going to wind up just rotting due to having way too much water. The other thing is when you look at a lot of the low-lying hills on the foothills of the Himalayas here, where you actually do have some forest up in this area here in the outlying mountain ranges, where you actually do have some forest, and people are clearing that forest land either because they need the wood for construction or for heating homes or cooking, whatever, or because they're just trying to convert more arable land into actual farmland. As they deforest those areas, the amount of water falling in that June to September timeframe will create significant erosion. And along the Himalayas, significant weathering followed by erosion. And with that erosion, of course, it can actually eventually scrape most of the usable soil away from the rocky ground underneath and can actually cause a reduction in farmable land or even land that's usable for grazing of crops. So as your book says, when you look at mudslides and loss of soil in the deforested areas, and you look at floods in the low-lying delta areas, the violent flows of water kill thousands of people as well as livestock every year. They also ruin crops, destroy homes, and wipe out roads. So we do see a lot of that activity. Now, if you go on under your natural disasters paragraph there, you see where they talk about a cyclone. It's an intense tropical storm with high winds and heavy rains. Cyclones are similar to hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean and typhoons in the North Pacific. In South Asia, cyclones can be followed by deadly tidal waves. Now, tidal waves, obsolete term, tsunami is the correct term. Can be followed by deadly tsunami that surged from the Bay of Bengal. In 1999, a cyclone struck India's northeast coast with winds of more than 160 miles per hour. Waves reached over 20 feet high. The storm killed about 10,000 people and left 15 million people homeless. So imagine a hurricane-like storm spinning out here in the Indian Ocean, and then it makes its way up to the Bay of Bengal, and it makes landfall here. The winds are going to sweep pretty much across the entire region of South Asia. If you look at pictures of hurricanes hitting the Gulf Coast, you see that while the eye of the storm might be very small, might not be any bigger than this river delta right here, that the storm itself is spitting out thunderstorms and rainfall in a massive circle around the entire area. 160-mile-an-hour winds. Obviously, if your house is not built out of stone or concrete, 160-mile-an-hour winds are going to cause some significant damage to wooden structures. The flooding from the rainfall is going to cause a significant amount of damage to anything that does not have a solid foundation. Most homes built along river valleys. And remember, 70% of the population of India actually lives in the river valleys. People that build there tend not to build basements with big foundations. Um, some of them don't even tend to build on slabs. Most of them they're building directly on the soil, and so the heavy winds and the heavy flooding are going to just take those homes out completely. And then couple that in with a 20-foot wave sweeping in over the land and coming up probably a couple of miles into the flatland. I mean, if you look at this river delta here, this is all relatively flat lowland in this area here. Relatively flat lowland in this area here, relatively flat lowland in this area here before you get to the low mountain range here, or you get to the Highland Plateau in this area here. All of that, when a wave comes sweeping up, 20-foot wave comes sweeping up on there, it might go 3 or 4 miles inland. And when it washes up over top of everything, it just crushes it under the weight of the water, and then sweeps the debris back out into the ocean as if nothing had ever happened. So these are natural disasters that can happen um, with those uh, with those monsoons and that monsoon activity. Now, if we look at the opposite of monsoon season, when we look at the dry season, um, part of the problem, you remember that we said most of this part of the peninsula is actually desert. And when you start looking at um, the desert areas in the central part of South Asia, you can see the areas here in red, extremely dry. The areas here in yellow, mostly dry. Um, we we're also in the tropics in this area, which means temperatures during the dry season get very, very warm. So the opposite is when you have little to no rain. In areas like this, it is possible actually for the lack of moisture and the amount of rainfall to actually cause scorching of the soil and scorching of any plant life that may be growing in those areas. And that's why the areas away from the rivers, the areas that just aren't getting much rainfall, don't have very good soil. These are the central highlands here. Um, these are your northern highlands stretching into your mountainous regions. These areas are very, very dry in the winter months, very, very hot. The sun can actually bake the vegetation to the point where the drought actually causes shortages of food, not just for humans, but shortages in the amount of grazing land available for actual livestock. So again, this is one of those other issues that forces the population to collect in the river valleys, such as along the Ganges and the other rivers that we've talked about up to this point. So those are some serious natural disasters. Now, if you look on page 619, over there on the right-hand side, you can see climate zones. And they only talk about 4 basic climate zones, and 2 of them they talk about as being co-located. They only talk about 4 basic main climate zones in South Asia. And I'm actually going to talk about 6 because while your textbook does break it down into 4 areas, they tend to focus on collective areas. And I want to look at something a little bit more specific. So in your book on page 619 there, they talk about tropical areas. And it says much of South and Central India has a tropical dry climate. South and Central India, you can see here in the really dark brown, the kind of light brown and the yellow streak running down the middle. That's central and south India. Regions, grasslands, and deciduous forests grow green in the short wet season and turn brown in the long dry season. Bangladesh and southern Sri Lanka, by contrast, have tropical wet climates. So here's Sri Lanka, here's Bangladesh, and of course this is the Bak Mountains, Western Baks Mountains, which are tropical wet climates. So here on in your book, they talk about the tropical areas as being one climate zone, tropical wet, tropical dry. Here on the map, they break it out into the two. So this light brown is your tropical dry climate, and that's represented by the Central Highlands, the southern plateau between the western and eastern broken mountain ranges. Your tropical wet climate just on the very west coast of India, the southwest portion of the island of Sri Lanka here, and of course the country of Bangladesh, all of which are drawing that moisture um, from the winds traveling across the Indian Ocean. In this case, mostly west to east. In this case, probably coming up from the southeast in the monsoon season. So your tropical climate area, tropical wet, tropical dry. South Asia's tropical region received the heaviest rainfalls from the wet monsoons, as we've talked about. Most of Bangladesh gets 100 inches of rain per year. The city of Cherrapunji in northeastern India, this is right in this area here. You can actually find it on one of your political maps in your textbook. That city gets 450 inches of rain per year. 450 inches of rain per year. It ranks as one of the wettest regions in the entire world. And it's that very, very tiny spot right there in northeast India. Going on page 620, you have dry and temperate climates. And as it says there in your book, the wet monsoons do not reach all of South Asia. Remember when we looked at the monsoon map, I wish my little menu would quit dropping down on me like that. If we look at the monsoon map, you can see on the monsoon map, it doesn't reach all of Southern Asia. It leaves the area to the extreme northwest here completely out of the rainfall area, and the area of northwest India and areas just north of the Himalayas are right on the edge of that heavy rainfall. So we don't actually see a whole lot of those areas, a whole lot of rainfall in those areas. So as a result, some areas have drier climates along the lower Indus River. The land is dry and windswept. Now remember, the Indus River flows in this part of South Asia, flows down into this little valley right here. So you can see along that area, you've got what's called high desert here in the pinkish tan area. That's around the mountain ranges. And then in this area, you've got what's called semi-arid, similar in this area here. And if you actually follow the Indus River, which it runs right along the edge of that shift in climate zone. So it's really running into this little bay here. It's really kind of the defining line for the semi-arid area, the semi-arid climate zone in that part of South Asia, what defines it as being different from the desert area. And it does say in your book that it's almost impossible to farm in this area, and this is in the northern highlands. It's impossible to farm in this area without some form of irrigation. Then it talks about the Thar Desert. If you're looking at the Thar Desert, oh, look at this. um, the was I off on my Indus River? Um, so you look at the desert area, uh, except along the coast, which is largely steppe. This area here. Few trees, grassland, another steppe area crosses the Deccan Plateau. Remember, the Deccan Plateau is this area between the western and eastern Ghat Mountains. That semi-arid plateau area. And yes, I believe I was off on my Indus River location. And of course, the Western Ghats block the rainfall in the area here, which means, again, is that humid air is coming in off of the Indian Ocean. It rises up when it hits the Western Ghat Mountains and drops most of its moisture on the western side of the mountains, leaving the center of the plateau much more arid. As you go north of the Ganges Plain, you get into the humid subtropical. Again, we're just here's the Tropic of Cancer, and you can see where the humid subtropical climate zone, right on the edge of that tropic area, running all the way up to the Himalayan mountain areas and the Himalayan plateau. Quite humid. They're going to get not so much more rainfall, but more humidity in the air. And again, it goes back to as we look at the warm, moist air that's coming in off that Bay of Bengal. Certainly in monsoon season from June to September, there's going to be significant rainfall. But even when there's not, you've got your two major rivers in that area, and you still have um, uh, the coast right there. So even though in the winter you've got the dry air coming in from China here in the Northeast, you still have humidity that's leaching in there from the Bay of Bengal, and the air, uh, the warm air, is going to make that humidity pretty much, I don't know, not difficult, but unpleasant to live in. And then last but not least, we talk about the highlands. And these are found along South Asia's northern edge, where the Himalayas scream up. You can see on the map here, the highlands are defined in the gray color. And you've got your two smaller mountain ranges over here to the northwest. You've got your Himalayas over here to the north and east. And your highland um, climate zone runs along the peaks of the Himalayas. And of course, the Himalayas are what separates South Asia from China and Central Asia as well. And so that highland climate zone is going to prevail in that area. And so above 16,000 feet, the temperatures are always below freezing. So snow never disappears. You're always going to have snow on the mountain peaks. A little bit of vegetation can survive. We talked about lichens as being looks like a moss, but it's not really a moss. It's a dry plant that clings to rocky areas and tends um, to grow when there's moisture and tends to go dormant when there's not. Um, you get some strange and unusual types of vegetation that will actually survive in that highland climate zone. Nepal's Katmandu Valley, um, which you might have seen in a couple of movies, but like I think one of the older Batman movies. Uh, he actually goes to Katmandu to um, learn how to become Batman. In uh, is it Doctor Strange in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? He's in the Katmandu Valley trying to find the the monks that are going to teach him how to be able to reuse his hands and all that. You get down into that valley region, and because it's protected from a lot of the airflow, it's also protected from a lot of direct sunlight. You tend to have very mild temperatures in that valley, so averaging from about 50 degrees up to about 80 degrees um, at the temperature extremes. When you get between peaks in that highland area, it tends to mild out a little bit. So if you will hold on for 1 second, I do want to go back and verify my concerns about the Indus River. No, I was right. I was absolutely right. So, yes, the Indus River is in fact um, running across this this pink area just to the left of the India political boundary, India-Pakistan political boundary. So this white line here is the boundary between India and Pakistan. Your Indus River is actually here in the desert area, right on the edge of that semi-arid area there. So I apologize for having the location off by a couple of 100 miles there. But it is still the defining instance between the actual desert and the semi-arid area. And it is drawing water, of course, from the highland area there. And this part of the pinkish area is the Thar Desert. Most of the Thar is actually lying on the Indian side of the political boundary, but it does run right up to the banks of the Indus River. So I do apologize for getting that incorrect. Now, as I was saying before, your book talks about 3 major climate zones. The screenshot here breaks it out into actually 6 climate zones. So your highlands, just like the book says, the gray areas around the Himalayan area, the part that separates South Asia from the rest of Asia. Your humid subtropical, which is the northern area, affected mostly by the moisture brought in from the Bay of Bengal, just outside the Tropic of Cancer. Your semi-arid, which includes your Deccan Plateau here in the center, and your northern highlands here in the northwest. Your tropical wet and dry, also known as your tropical dry, which makes up most of the area between the western and eastern Ghat Mountains, the island of Sri Lanka here. And your tropical wet climate on the western side of the western Ghat Mountains, the southwestern corner of Sri Lanka, and of course Bangladesh, with the wettest part of the region being this one little city here in northeastern India that draws 450 inches of rain per year. And then, of course, your desert region, the Thar Desert, up in the extreme northwest. So I will encourage you to read section 2 of chapter 22. I will be posting a worksheet for climate, graphing the climate change in this region that I will be expecting you to work on this week. And when we pick up, we'll actually end chapter 22. we will be picking up with chapter 28 next week. And some of you might have received hard copy materials for both chapters 22 and 28. That's great. If you do the hard copy versions, make sure that you attach an image of your finished work to the assignment when you turn it in classroom, or um, or at least be able to email me a copy of the image, and make sure that the image is clear enough that I can actually make out your handwriting so that I can give you a decent grade. Other than that, just a reminder that if you have any questions at all, you can send me a private message through Classroom on the specific assignment. Or if you have a general question, you can just email me directly at my school email address. And Monday through Friday, I'm on that thing 12 hours a day. I will respond within the hour. Saturdays and Sundays, I check the email periodically throughout the day, and I'm more than willing to assist you through direct email as well. So with that, I will say goodbye for now.